We can break Donald Trump's trade war with the world into a series of repeating patterns. Step 1, make a maximalist threat.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
Step 2, let it simmer to create leverage.
U.S. tariffs rattling investors, sparking dramatic losses.
Global financial markets are tanking again.
Step 3, pull back.
President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs.
And step 4, no matter the outcome, claim a historic win, which justifies the cycle.
We have many meetings planned today and tomorrow, and every country wants to be making deals.
He's the closer. He gets deals done that we could never get done.
Well, this is the art of the trade deal.
We can use 2 key U.S. trading partners, China and the UK, to answer the question, does this strategy even work? Then there's a third case, which might suggest maybe the strategy has its limits. Let me explain. Donald Trump has a history of finding and taking the most aggressive line possible in attempting to resolve even the most delicate and complex issues.
Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago.
This is Donald Trump. A few minutes ago, I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip. My administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it.
So there's something called the madman theory of politics, which is sometimes applied to Donald Trump, but originally to Richard Nixon.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Yeah, that Richard Nixon. But before he was swept out of office by the Watergate scandal, Nixon's most pressing problem was how to end the Vietnam War. And this madman theory was about cultivating an image of Nixon so willing to go to extremes that he would even use nuclear weapons if necessary.
When Americans are risking their lives in war, it is the responsibility of their leaders to take some risks for peace.
Trump has adopted a version of this as step 1 of his playbook.
Step 1 starts off by asking for the moon and requesting that the counterparty builds and finances a staircase to the moon.
So let's consider Trump's approach to China.
China's been ripping us off for many years.
Trump's position is that China cheats at trade, that they manipulate their currency, unfairly subsidize their industries, and maintain artificially low labor standards, allowing them to flood global markets with cheap goods no one can compete with. So he threatened tariffs.
The U.S. imposing a 10% tax on all Chinese goods.
Additional 10%.
A 34% tax.
Additional 50%.
The total rate of 145%.
You try to use every single kind of point of leverage that you have against somebody. You make very broad demands of people and suggest that you're very firm in these demands, that you're not backing down.
Yes, step 1 is all about making it seem like you're ready to go to infinity and beyond. And really, when you're talking about 145% tariffs, they might as well be infinity tariffs.
Tariffs under 50% will tend to squeeze profit margins. Tariffs above 50% will tend to end all trade.
And that leads to step 2, which is to simply wait and watch.
Carnage, panic, bloodbath doesn't even begin to cut it.
Chinese markets deep in the red. Now Hong Kong stocks plunged the most in almost 3 decades.
China sells more product to the United States than any other country in the world. Almost $500 billion worth in 2024 alone. Meaning, every single day, Americans are buying more than $1 billion in Chinese goods. If that source of revenue dries up, well, that's real pressure. But it's pressure that acts both ways.
There has been an acknowledgement that this is creating problems with the U.S. economy.
So we come to step 3, which has tended to arrive just when things start to look really bad. In China's case, Trump's tariffs slowed traffic at U.S. shipping ports on the West Coast to an absolute crawl. That's lost money and lost jobs. Businesses, unsure whether to stockpile Chinese goods or abandon them altogether, they paid the steepest price. And China's counter tariffs only added to the worry that this was all making for a very shaky economic future. So,
China and the United States have agreed to drastically reduce tariffs on both sides
for a 90-day period.
And this paved the way for step 4, which is to claim any outcome as a big win, even if the only measurable outcome of a trade deal the White House celebrates as historic is a partial rollback of tariffs that Trump had himself initiated and then caused. The agreement does include vague language about future talks and cooperation, but these are aspirational. There are no enforceable commitments, no clear timelines. Not that that matters much, especially for those who are predisposed to seeing Trump's actions in a favorable light.
It's incredible what President Trump has done over the weekend. He brokered that India-Pakistani ceasefire. He got Zelensky and Putin to go to the table, and then also the U.S. and China trade deal.
Well, I've been busy, but I've enjoyed it because we're getting things accomplished. We're getting things done.
The pattern often is to do something that makes things dramatically worse for everybody. So let's imagine we're at point 0. He'll take something and make it negative 20. And then the thing he declares as a win is something like negative 5.
So it is substantial how much they came down with these tariffs at this point and how much they got done this weekend is a massive surprise.
He's firing on all cylinders. Maybe we finally get, the markets are responding positively to this trade deal being done. It's a framework. There's still more negotiation to go, but it's a step in the right direction.
So it's an improvement from where he put the parties, but it's actually typically not an improvement from where we started.
Now, not all of Trump's trade deals go this way. What makes the strategy work is that he does sometimes extract concessions that he probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Let me show you what that looks like. The way Trump defines trading relationships, the US currently rips off the UK because it runs a trade surplus with them. If it were the other way around, Trump would call it unfair and impose tariffs. But it's not. And Trump imposed tariffs anyway.
The United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender.
Among Trump's tariffs that would come to affect UK goods, a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum and a 25% tariff on cars, which was a particularly big blow considering the #1 UK export to the United States is cars.
The classic bully strategy is you push around the small guys. And if you're the United States, you know, most economies are smaller.
What Trump knew from the start, though, is that bullying works. So once the threat was made and the economic damage made clear, the two sides made a deal.
This morning, I'm thrilled to announce that we have reached a breakthrough trade deal with the United Kingdom. Incredible country.
And it was more than a breakthrough, according to the White House. This was, once again, historic. A great deal for America. The deal was certainly lopsided. The United States' main concession was simply to undo some of the tariffs Trump had just imposed. The universal 10% tariff on UK goods, that would stay in effect, but the tariff on cars and the tariff on steel and aluminum would largely be dropped, or at least reconsidered.
The design is other countries come here, offer concessions, and we decide whether they're acceptable or not. And then the US concession is that we won't do what we threatened to do.
So this was a great deal. In the same way, give me your wallet or I'll shoot you is a great deal if you're mugging someone. And the wallet, in this case, is what the White House refers to as a $5 billion opportunity created by the UK, granting American ethanol and cattle farmers higher sales quotas and lower tariff rates. Basically, more market access for American companies. But let's be clear, even the White House is careful to call this only an opportunity because access is not the same thing as a sale. What the UK didn't change, for example, are its strict food safety standards, which have kept American chlorine-washed chicken and hormone-treated beef out of British markets. So American industry players are pretty cautious, calling the so-called historic deal an important first step in expanding markets, but also acknowledging more work is needed to remove the arbitrary barriers that have excluded American-grown food from grocery stores in the UK. And so here's the prevailing takeaway. Though hailed by the leaders of the two countries as significant, analysts said it did not appear to meaningfully alter the terms of trade between the countries as they stood before the changes introduced by Trump this year. Meaning, this is no trade deal. There just isn't enough in it to call it that. At best, it's a framework for a deal among industries that don't even form a major basis for US-UK trade to begin with.
US agriculture products, ethanol, American beef, those aren't big imports for the UK. These aren't like major big ticket items that are really going to have a large scale effect on the US economy. These are the things that we can point to as being legitimate concessions that don't really make a whole lot of a difference.
At this stage, I should state something pretty plainly, that my point here isn't to show you how little Trump has accomplished, because his administration can and does argue the exact opposite.
They all want to make a deal because we have something that they all want.
But what I think I can show you is how steep a price the US may pay for whatever it is Trump believes he has accomplished.
Markets are tumbling as investors are really digesting worse than expected tariffs.
Wall Street reacted with fear and pessimism.
We know Trump's tariffs, imposed on nearly every single country in the world, caused the American stock market to suddenly lose trillions of dollars in value. And we know this is both a symptom and a cause of an awful lot of economic uncertainty.
With the profit outlook dimming, what firms will do is they'll start layoffs or some cost-cutting measure.
They're certainly not going to expand and add that new fleet of trucks or that new warehouse. And that, too, will bleed into the real-life economy of everyday people.
But there's also an additional cost, one that you can't easily measure in dollars and cents, at least not right away.
The notion that you take a single issue and anchor in a kind of take it or leave it way, in a bullying kind of way to extract a few concessions, falls apart. And the reason why it falls apart is what it does is it eviscerates trust.
What does he mean by that? Well, consider for a moment how America's closest ally now appears to see things. When one polling firm asked Canadians in February how they viewed the US, nearly a third saw it as an enemy. That was nearly on par with the number of people who saw it as a friend. And it's worth just pausing on that for a moment, because that is an extraordinarily harsh judgment on Americans in a relationship that arguably spent the next several months getting worse. We know now that feeling has had an impact on how Canadians shop, how Canadians travel, and where this country's leaders look for long-term relationships.
Our old relationship, based on steadily increasing integration, is over.
Consider once again the UK. They just agreed to a free trade deal with India, one of the biggest tariff reductions, slashing Indian taxes on British cars from 100% down to 10%, which gives the UK a potential alternative to the US for one of its most important exports. And consider the case of China, which was forced to pivot after Trump's first term.
I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it, so I'm taking on China.
Over the last several years, China forged stronger economic ties with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. As the #1 buyer of soybeans worldwide, it buys more today from Brazil than it ever has, and its imports from the US have dropped significantly. It is China, not the US, who is right now the largest trading partner of most countries on planet Earth.
And I think that in the long term, there is that risk to the United States of America that the other countries are going to realize US is no longer magnanimous. It's quite Machiavellian, it's quite transactional, and so the rest of the world has to reorient as well and act accordingly.
When you are at war, inconsistency, chaos, surprise attacks are exactly what you want. But when someone is your business partner, are they people who are arbitrary, capricious, and random?
There's no question, on some level, what Donald Trump does just works. The US has unquestionable leverage. Constantly using it keeps Trump at the center of attention, and his supporters admire that show of strength, even when the results are fuzzy. But experts tell us Trump also risks sending the world a message that undercuts and erodes the very thing he relies on.
The signal the U.S. is sending is that we're no longer a reliable economic partner.
And if that signal were to get louder and take hold in a more permanent way, the world might inch closer to a very different future, one that doesn't always revolve around the United States.